My name is Daniel Kovac. I was 42 years old when I died for 5 minutes and came back knowing I had misunderstood almost everything I thought I believed. I don't say that for drama. I say it because the moment I opened my eyes again, nothing felt solid anymore. Even the hospital bed felt temporary, like something borrowed. I remember thinking, very clearly, that the world I had returned to was thinner than the one I had just left. Like paper compared to wood. I didn't feel fear when it happened. That's what unsettles me most. I expected panic, or darkness, or pain. Instead, there was a clean break. 1 second I was present, and the next I wasn't part of my body anymore. It felt final in a way I can't fully explain. Not dramatic. Decisive. What stayed with me wasn't the moment my heart stopped. It was what followed. A sequence of scenes that didn't rush, didn't glow, didn't try to impress me. They just showed me things I somehow recognized as true the instant I saw them. I came back carrying that weight. Not fear. Weight. Like being trusted with something I didn't ask for. People ask if I saw heaven or hell. That's not the right question. What I saw was closer than that. It was about what we build, what we lean on, and what we pretend is solid because it feels familiar. I had gone to church most of my life. I knew the language. I knew the rules. I thought that meant I understood. What happened in those 5 minutes stripped that confidence away completely. When the doctor later told me how long my heart had stopped, I nodded like it made sense. It didn't. Time worked differently where I was. Not faster, not slower, just irrelevant. I didn't come back inspired. I came back disturbed. Quietly disturbed. Like noticing a crack in a wall you've been leaning on for years. And I haven't been able to unsee it since. Before that day, my life looked fine from the outside. Predictable in a comfortable way. I worked as a facilities manager for a mid-sized office complex. Same building, same routes, same badge clipped to my belt every morning. I liked routine. It made the days blur together without friction. I woke up early, drank coffee I barely tasted, checked emails I half read. I drove the same streets and complained about traffic like it was a personal insult. Sundays meant church, but more out of habit than hunger. I knew when to stand, when to sit, when to nod. I left feeling clean enough to repeat the week. I believed in God. At least I said I did. But belief, for me, was passive. Something inherited, not examined. It didn't interfere with my plans or make demands on how I lived. It sat neatly beside everything else, like a framed photo you stop noticing. I assumed time was generous. Not infinite, but long enough. Long enough to fix things later. Long enough to get serious someday. Long enough to stay comfortable now. Church felt stable. Organized. Safe. Different groups, different opinions, but all under one roof. I didn't think much about what held it together. I assumed it always would. Most of my faith lived in words, not actions. I trusted systems more than people. Structures more than honesty. If something looked established, I assumed it was strong. That confidence shaped how I treated people. Polite, distant, efficient. I avoided tension. I avoided questions that didn't have clear answers. I liked faith that stayed in its lane. I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. That's the part that bothers me now. I thought I was fine. If you had asked me that morning whether my life needed changing, I would have said no without hesitation. I had plans. I had stability. I had tomorrow. I didn't know how fragile all of that was. The collapse didn't feel dramatic when it started. I was walking down a service corridor, checking a faulty HVAC panel. I remember thinking about lunch. Nothing important. Just noise filling the space. Then my chest tightened. Not sharp pain. Pressure. Like someone leaning their weight into me slowly. I stopped walking and leaned against the wall, annoyed more than alarmed. My vision narrowed. The hallway felt longer than it was. Sounds became distant, like they were coming from behind a closed door. I tried to breathe deeper, but my lungs didn't cooperate. I remember thinking, this is inconvenient. My knees gave out without warning. I didn't fall hard. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor, still oddly calm. My hands felt heavy. My left arm tingled, then went numb. There was a radio clipped to my belt. I reached for it and missed. My coordination was gone. That's when I understood something was seriously wrong, but the realization came without panic. The pressure in my chest faded suddenly. Not into relief. Into absence. Like a switch being flipped off. I took one shallow breath, and then nothing followed. There was no struggle. No dramatic last thought. Just a sense of letting go, even though I hadn't decided to. The corridor lights flickered overhead. I noticed a small stain on the ceiling tile I'd meant to report weeks earlier. That detail stays with me for reasons I don't understand. Then the floor wasn't under me anymore. The weight vanished. The body sensation disappeared completely. Not numbness. Not darkness. Just separation. I didn't feel myself dying. I felt myself leave. I became aware of myself without a body. That's the cleanest way I can say it. I wasn't floating, and I wasn't rising. There was no movement at all. I was simply present, watching my body from a distance that felt exact, like it had been measured. I saw myself on the floor of the corridor. My badge was twisted sideways. One shoe had slid off my heel. A man I barely knew from accounting was running toward me, shouting into his phone. His face looked stretched, urgent, but the sound didn't reach me. I understood immediately that what I was looking at no longer belonged to me. There was no panic in that realization. That surprised me. I expected instinct to kick in, some pull back into myself. Instead, there was clarity. Sharp, quiet clarity. I knew I was dead, and I knew it wasn't a mistake. Time didn't pass the way it used to. Moments didn't stack. Everything existed at once, but without chaos. I could see details without focusing on them. The flickering light, the scuffed baseboards, the man's hands shaking as he pressed on my chest. I felt no attachment to the scene. Not coldness, not indifference, more like completion, like closing a door you didn't realize had been open your whole life. There was no tunnel, no rush. The space around me wasn't dark or bright. It was neutral, like standing in a room with no walls, but still knowing exactly where you are. I didn't wonder what would happen next. I waited, and I wasn't alone for long. I became aware of a presence before I saw anything. It didn't arrive. It didn't announce itself. It was simply there, and the moment I noticed it, I knew it had always been there. Not watching, not judging, aware. The presence felt solid. Not physical, but grounded, like standing next to something that doesn't need to prove its strength. There was authority in it, but no pressure. When I turned toward it, there was no shock of recognition. I didn't need an explanation. I knew who it was without being told. Not because of how it looked, but because of how it felt. He didn't speak right away, and somehow that silence communicated more than words ever had. I became aware of myself more fully in that moment. Not my body, my intentions, my habits, my patterns. Things I had never lined up before suddenly sat side by side, exposed but not condemned. I realized I couldn't hide anything there. Not because I was being searched, but because hiding didn't exist. Everything I was came with me. I expected questions. I expected correction. Instead, I was shown. The space shifted without moving. Scenes unfolded without transitioning. It wasn't like watching a screen. It was like standing inside understanding. I sensed disappointment, but not anger. Not frustration. Something heavier, like sadness that had been patient for a long time. And then I understood what was about to happen. I was going to see what I had built my faith on. What I saw wasn't my life replayed. It was my beliefs laid out in front of me. They didn't appear as words or memories. They appeared as structures, systems, things I had trusted to hold weight. Some looked solid at first glance, organized, familiar, comforting. Churches appeared, not buildings, but frameworks. Groups of people standing close together, speaking the same language, but not always hearing each other. Lines drawn softly at first, then hardened over time. I recognized my own assumptions in those lines. The way I believed agreement meant unity. The way I thought structure meant truth. The way I assumed safety came from belonging to the right group. No one explained this to me. I saw it the way you see a flaw once the light hits it right. Some structures were stable because they were simple. Others were elaborate and fragile, held together by habit and fear of change. I saw how easily they fractured under pressure, not violently, but quietly. People drifting apart while insisting they were still united. What shook me most was realizing how often I had confused familiarity with faithfulness. I saw moments where I chose comfort over honesty, where I accepted explanations because they were clean, not because they were true, where I ignored tension because questioning felt dangerous. The presence didn't accuse me. That would have been easier. Instead, I felt the weight of responsibility settle in. Not guilt. Accountability. Like being shown you had been given something valuable and treated it casually. I understood then that division wasn't coming from the outside. It was already inside, and it was going to surface. The next thing I was shown came together slowly. I stood in front of a long path. Not dramatic. No mist, no glow. Just a plain, wide path stretching forward. It looked well used, packed down by years of footsteps. Easy to walk. Familiar. People were already on it. Lots of them, walking calmly, talking, gesturing, nodding to one another as they moved forward. No one looked lost. No one looked afraid. It felt organized, agreed upon. I stepped onto the path without thinking. It felt natural. My feet fitted, like it had been shaped for me long ago. As I walked, I noticed small signs along the sides. Not warnings. Assurances. Words like safe, correct, approved. They weren't posted aggressively. They were subtle, almost polite. Easy to trust. The path didn't lead anywhere specific. It just continued. The people around me seemed content with that. Forward movement itself appeared to be the goal. Then I noticed something off. The ground beneath us was thinning. Not cracking. Not collapsing. Just slowly losing substance. Like packed dirt turning to dust grain by grain. Most people didn't notice. A few felt it and adjusted their stride. No one stopped walking. I realized then that the path didn't require intention. Only participation. You could stay on it forever without deciding anything. To the side, barely visible, was another route. Narrow, uneven, not marked. It didn't look dangerous, but it didn't promise anything either. I felt hesitation for the first time. Leaving the main path meant stepping away from certainty, from agreement, from the comfort of numbers. The presence didn't tell me what to do. It waited. I was shown something that looked solid. A structure stood ahead, wide and tall, built from clean lines and familiar shapes. It resembled a shelter more than a building. Open entrances, strong supports, a place meant to hold people together. Inside, everything felt stable. Voices echoed softly. People leaned on the walls without concern. The roof didn't creak. Nothing shook. I recognized the feeling immediately. This was security through design. Through planning. Through rules that made sense on paper. Then pressure came. Not suddenly. Gradually. Like weight being added one layer at a time. The walls didn't crack. The supports didn't snap. Instead, small joints began to shift. Fasteners loosened quietly. The people inside adjusted. They braced themselves. They reassured one another that the structure had lasted this long and would last longer. I noticed something crucial. The structure wasn't built to withstand pressure. It was built to avoid it. As the weight increased, the walls began to bow inward. Not enough to alarm anyone at first. Just enough to change the shape of the space. Eventually, people were forced closer together. Less room to move. Less room to breathe. Still, no one left. Leaving would mean admitting the shelter wasn't what they thought it was. Then parts of the roof gave way. Not in collapse. In withdrawal. Like something deciding it no longer needed to stay. What remained standing looked intact from a distance. Up close, it was hollow. The final vision was simpler. I saw two objects placed side by side. One was large, polished, impressive. Its surface reflected light cleanly. It looked dependable. The kind of thing you'd trust without testing. The other was plain. Rough edges. No finish. Easy to overlook. Pressure was applied again. Slowly. The polished object held at first. It resisted well. But when it failed completely. A sudden split ran through it, and it broke into pieces that couldn't support anything anymore. The plain object shifted. Adjusted. Its rough edges absorbed the strain. It bent slightly, but it didn't break. I understood the point instantly. Appearance had fooled me my entire life. I had trusted what looked organized, confident, established. I had overlooked what was quiet, uneven, and demanding. The presence let me feel the truth of that realization fully. Not shame. Recognition. What holds under pressure isn't always what draws attention. What looks united isn't always aligned. What feels safe isn't always strong. And what's coming would test everything built on appearance alone. That's when I sensed time pressing in. Not fear. Urgency. The urgency didn't arrive like a warning. There were no words, no countdown, no threat attached to it. It felt more like standing on a platform and realizing the train had already started moving. I became aware that what I was being shown wasn't endless. Not because someone said so, but because the space itself felt narrower. Not closing in, focusing. The presence shifted my attention back to the structures I had seen before. The paths, the shelters, the things that failed quietly. I could sense pressure increasing everywhere at once, even where nothing had broken yet. I understood then that time wasn't running out in the way people imagine. It wasn't about dates or disasters. It was about exposure. What had been hidden by comfort was going to be revealed by strain. People wouldn't be forced to choose. That was the part that unsettled me most. Choice would emerge naturally as systems stopped holding. as explanations failed, as unity based on agreement cracked under disagreement. Some would cling tighter to what looked familiar. Others would step away slowly, not because they wanted to rebel, but because they could no longer ignore what they were standing on. I realized how many times I had delayed honesty in my own life because it felt safer to wait. I assumed clarity would come later, when things were calmer. There wouldn't be a calmer moment. The presence didn't ask me to fix anything. That wasn't my role. I wasn't being sent back with answers or authority. I was being sent back with awareness. Awareness that pretending costs time. Awareness that structures don't save people. Awareness that pressure doesn't create division, it reveals it. Then the sense of narrowing intensified. I knew, without being told, that I was about to return. The pain came back all at once. It wasn't gradual. It slammed into me like gravity reasserting itself. My chest burned. My lungs seized. Air rushed in violently, like my body was offended I'd been gone. Voices crashed into my awareness. Sharp, panicked, someone shouting my name, even though I hadn't heard it spoken where I had been. My eyes opened to fluorescent lights and faces hovering too close. A mask pressed over my mouth. Hands everywhere. The weight of my body felt wrong, like wearing something too heavy. Confusion hit immediately. Not about where I was, but about why I was back. The clarity I had just held began slipping away. Not disappearing, but dulling. Like trying to remember a dream while waking into noise. I wanted to stay quiet. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to explain anything yet. Everything felt fragile, like saying it out loud too early would distort it. In the hospital room later, after the monitors settled and the urgency faded, the heaviness arrived. Not fear, grief. I grieved the simplicity I had lost. The ability to move through life without noticing what I stood on. The comfort of assuming things would hold just because they always had. The doctor told me I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt interrupted. I'm telling you this quietly because that's how it stays true. I didn't come back with instructions. I didn't come back certain about everything. If anything, I came back less sure of the things I used to defend confidently. What I know now is simple, and it's uncomfortable. Pressure is coming, not as punishment, not as spectacle, but as reality. And pressure doesn't care what you call yourself or where you sit on Sunday. It only reveals what you've been leaning on. If your faith depends on agreement, it will fracture. If it depends on structure, it will bend. If it depends on appearance, it will fail suddenly. What holds is quieter, less polished, harder to package. I'm not asking you to change overnight. I'm not asking you to leave anything or join anything else. That's not my place. I'm asking you to look honestly at what you trust to hold you when things get uncomfortable. Not what sounds right. Not what feels safe. What actually holds underweight. I thought I had time to sort that out later. I was wrong. And I don't think I'm the only one.